to our reflection for the third Sunday of Advent. I invite you to listen to a proclamation of the Holy Gospel according to John. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony, to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify to the light. And this was the testimony of John. When Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him, "Who are you?" he admitted, and did not deny, but admitted, "I am not the Christ." They said to him, "Who then, or what then are you? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." So they asked him, "Who are you, so that we can give an answer to the ones who sent us? What do you have to say for yourself?" He said to them, "I am the voice of one crying out in the desert, 'Make straight the ways of the Lord,' as Isaiah the prophet said." Some Pharisees were also sent. They asked him, "Why do you baptize then, if you are not the Christ or Elijah or the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water, but there is one among you whom you do not recognize, the one who is coming after me, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to unfasten." These things happened in Bethany across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord. As I was praying and thinking about this gospel story that we just heard, I was struck in the near end part of the passage by the line that says, "There is one among you whom you do not recognize." John is addressing the Pharisees, the priests, and the Levites at this point. There's one among you whom you do not recognize. And I found myself wondering, why is it that they did not recognize him? I mean, to recognize someone is to perhaps see again someone whom you've seen before, or it is to identify someone who's been described to you before. And sometimes to recognize someone is to acknowledge a position of office or authority, like I recognize you as president, for example. So what does it mean to recognize, and why is it that the people whom John was addressing did not recognize one who was already among them? It's important for us to wrestle with this question, because how we answer that perhaps will help us to identify how we can or cannot recognize Emmanuel, God with us, in our place and time. And so I would like to offer you a story that I think, as it unfolds, gives us some elements of what it means to recognize and how we recognize. It's a true story. Way back in the early spring, before the COVID pandemic forced the shutdown of churches and so many institutions, it was a Sunday morning, and between masses, and I came to my suite upstairs above the parish offices and sat on the couch, was having a cup of coffee. I think I might have turned the television on. And as I looked up, I saw what looked like a bug on the ceiling. It looked like it might be a centipede or a thousand-legger. And as I looked at it, I recognized that this bug was not moving. So I thought, maybe it's dead. So I got up and took a closer look and realized that it was not a bug, but it was a mark in the ceiling, a mark that I hadn't seen before, maybe about 3 inches long and very narrow. And I thought, that's odd. It's odd that I hadn't seen that before. And as I was turning around to go back to the couch, I noticed that on the floor beneath one of the windows in the room, there were pieces of plastic on the floor. And I came and looked a little bit closer, and I recognized that these were pieces of the blind that hung over the window that I was facing. And I thought, that's strange. I wonder how these got broken. And so I pulled the curtain back a little bit so I could see the blind, and there were several slats that were missing. And then I noticed that there was a hole in the window. And also there was a bending of the frame around the window. And I thought, this looks like a bullet hole. And then I began to put the pieces together and think that maybe that mark on the ceiling is from a bullet that came through this window and put that mark on the ceiling. And obviously at the time I was safe, but I was concerned. And so I called the police, and later in the early afternoon, the police came and we walked through my suite, and he agreed this looked like a bullet hole. In fact, as we pulled the curtain back, there was a definite hole even in the curtain. But we looked all through the apartment, all through the suite, and could find no bullet. This was very strange indeed. And couldn't find any evidence of a bullet ricocheting anywhere or any other damage. It just was strange. And it remained that way for several months. And as we were about to do some repair work in the suite, I was cleaning up and moving things off of surfaces so they wouldn't be filled with paint. And I went to an end table on the opposite end of the couch from where I normally sit. And there on that end table was this. You probably can't see it, but it was the bullet. I showed it to some other people and they identified it readily as a 9mm bullet. I have absolutely no idea how it got there. Based on the way I had assessed things, it had no business being there. But I was very surprised to find it there. So this is a story I would like to unpack with a view towards seeing if we could understand what it means for the people in this gospel story to recognize one who was already with them, so that we might recognize one who is already with us. What was involved in this story? Well, first of all, we notice that that bullet was already there. It was already there it was already there before I came into the room that Sunday morning, and it was already there for the months that I looked for it. It was already there all the time. In the gospel story, John says to the people in the story, there is one already among you. So the stories are premised with the fact that the one they are asking about is already present among them. They just don't recognize him. And I suppose we can say that we confess that God is always present with us. We might not always be attentive to that presence. We might not always recognize that presence when it stirs among us. But the beginning of the recognition of that presence is to posit the reality that that presence is always with us. The second thing that I would point out about the story of the bullet is that my recognition of what was happening happened gradually. First there was the noticing of the mark on the ceiling, then the plastic on the floor, then the holes in the window, and then kind of the dawning awareness that this must be a bullet hole. And so it is with recognizing the presence of the one who was already with them that John the Baptist was pointing out. It happened gradually for the people in this story. In this particular story, they did not yet recognize. But as the gospel unfolds, there are a number of opportunities to recognize that are presented to these very same people. For example, there is the wedding at Cana, where water is turned into wine. There is the feeding of the crowds. There is the healing of the man born blind. There is the raising of Lazarus. All of these would have been opportunities for the priests, the Levites, and the Pharisees to begin to recognize the one who was among them. And some did a little bit, some missed the point altogether, but the recognition was gradual. And so it is, I think, with our recognition of the presence of God among us. There are all kinds of opportunities that we have in our lives to recognize the one who is already with us. Some of those events might be They might be big events like weddings or funerals or sicknesses. Some might be smaller but significant events like spending time with a loved one or just resting in peace and quiet. Perhaps coming to church and discovering the God who is already there ahead of us. These are opportunities to recognize the one who is already with us. Sometimes we come to a little bit of a recognition of what's happening. Sometimes those prior recognitions help us to see more clearly later on, and sometimes we miss them altogether. In the story about the bullet, what happens is that I found some clues and I pieced them together to try to make sense of what had happened, how it had happened, and what it meant. And so too did the people in the gospel story that we heard today. Notice that the people from Jerusalem begin by asking a set of questions. They are asking about the Christ. They're asking about Elijah. They're asking about the prophet. They come with clues from their religious heritage that help them to try to figure out what's going on here. John is baptizing. He says he's one who is like in the heritage of the prophet Isaiah. What's happening? How is it happening? And what does it mean? And I think in our own lives, as we go to those opportunities that we have for recognizing the presence of God in our midst, we too look for clues to answer those questions. What has happened here in this particular event, in this particular circumstance, in this relationship? How did it happen? And what does it mean for me? What does it mean for us that God seems to be little by little gradually disclosing God's self to us as one already with us? Another important aspect of this bullet story, as I'm calling it, is that I didn't find the bullet when I was looking for it. And that's because I think the clues that I had pieced together had me looking in a particular direction, had me come to a certain set of conclusions that forestalled the possibility of me looking in an entirely different part of the room. Looking in one direction, I was unable to see what was in plain view in another direction. I think some of the same thing might have been going on in this gospel story. Because the Levites and the priests and the Pharisees were so focused on their understanding of the Christ, their understanding of Elijah and the prophets, that they were looking in a particular direction, and what God was disclosing to them about God's presence already among them was something different than that. They were looking in one way and they missed what was in plain view somewhere else. I think sometimes we can be that way. As we interpret our life experience, as we try to understand how God is working among us, how we try to internalize what we have been taught about how God is present among us, sometimes we can get set in our ways of doing and seeing things so that we're looking in one direction and we miss something else. We get set in our ways so we miss God's ways. And then, of course, the denouement of the bullet story is that when I wasn't looking for it, there it was. I was surprised to find that it was there all along. It was a different outcome than I had expected. So too, eventually what happened with the people in the story of the gospel is that something different happened for them as well. They were surprised. They were surprised that the one that they thought was the Christ and Elijah and the prophet was one who washed his disciples' feet, who was crucified on the cross, and ultimately who was raised from the dead. This was beyond their imagination. It was a surprise to them, this recognition of just who this God already with them was. And I think so too with us. I can testify many times in my life that God has moved and disclosed God's self to me in ways that were completely unexpected, completely surprising. Some of those surprises were big, some of them were intriguing, some of them were small little aha moments, but surprises nonetheless. And that makes sense, because the God whom we confess as always already with us is always bigger than we, always beyond our comprehension, our ability of our hearts or minds to connect. So surprise is an element of this. So when we ask, how did the Pharisees and the priests and Levites not recognize and come to recognize, these aspects of the process, I think, are in play. And when we ask, how do we recognize the God who is already present among us, or sometimes miss that recognition, some of the same things are at play. So I invite all of us today to think about the basic reality that God is already one with us, and to be attentive that we might recognize and be open to the presence as that is disclosed to us in sometimes surprising ways. Amen. Thinking about the God who is always already present with us and that whom we can sometimes miss and sometimes recognize, I was drawn to Psalm 139. It's one of my favorite Psalms. I'd like to read a portion of it. Lord, you have probed me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I stand. You understand my thoughts from afar. My travels and my rest you mark, and with all my ways you are familiar. Even before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know the whole of it. Behind and before you encircle me, and rest your hand upon me. Such knowledge is beyond me, far too lofty for me to reach. Where can I hide from your spirit? From your presence, where can I flee? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I lie down in Sheol, you are there too. If I fly with the wings of the dawn and alight beyond the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand hold me fast. If I say, surely darkness shall hide me, and night shall be my light, darkness is not dark for you, and night shines as the day. Darkness and light are but one. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. I praise you. So wonderfully you made me. Wonderful are your works. My very self you knew. My bones were not hidden from you. When I was being made in secret, fashioned as in the depths of the earth, your eyes foresaw my actions. In your book all are written down. My days were shaped before one came to be. How precious to me are your designs, O God, how vast the sum of them. Were I to count, they would outnumber the sands. To finish, I would need eternity. Probe me, God, know my heart. Try me, know my concerns. See if my way is crooked, then lead me in the ancient paths. Amen.
If you would follow me, follow where life will lead. Do not look for me among the dead, for I am hidden in pain. If you believe in me, my voice will be heard. All that is hidden will be made clear. All that is dark now will be revealed. What you have heard in the dark, proclaim in the light. What you hear in whispers, proclaim from the housetops. If you would rise with me, rise through your destiny. Do not refuse the death which brings you life. For as the grain in the earth must die for rebirth, so I have planted your life deep within mine. All that is hidden will be made clear. All that is dark now will be revealed. What you have heard in the dark, proclaim in the light. What you hear in whispers, proclaim from the housetops.